Hello everyone, Comic Hoarder 410 here, finally getting around to doing another video of my EC comic book collection. I had made it through videos of my Two-Fisted Tales and my Tales from the Crypt books before I got sidetracked with sale hauls and whatnot, so I'm finally getting around to showing my EC science fiction books, and I'm a huge fan of these books. But oddly enough, they didn't sell as well when they came out in the Golden Age as most of the other EC titles like Mad and all of their horror books. I think there's a few reasons for that. First and foremost, when I get into showing these titles, you'll see that Weird Science and its companion title, Weird Fantasy, the logos were just way too similar, and it confused people when they saw them on the news racks. They thought they had already bought that issue when in fact they probably hadn't. And the other thing was, as I've mentioned many times, unlike Marvel and DC, who like to launch brand new number ones as often as they can to drum up quick sales, back in the Golden Age, these publishers didn't look at launching a new issue at number one as a good thing. They would take an existing title they were going to cancel and just change the name of the book but keep the numbering, because in their minds that told fans this is a successful and long-running, well-selling title. So, as with many of their books, before it became Weird Science with issue 12, I believe, it was Saddle Romance. And the other thing that EC used to do with the numbering was they would not relaunch it at number one to avoid paying a new postal permit fee. That's how they get around it. But the post office caught on during Weird Science, I think with issue 15 or 16. So again, it was very confusing because when they changed it from Saddle Romance, you had another 12 or 13 through issue 15 of Weird Science. Then when they caught on, the post office caught on, they relaunched it at number one. And then later on, you had another issue 12 or 13 through 15 of Weird Science. So there's two of each of those issues of Weird Science, and you have to look on the inside to see when it was published. So definitely a bit convoluted, and it made it harder for collectors like me trying to track them down later. But this title here, Weird Science, this is issue number 11, so it's obviously from the second numbering. Al Feldstein cover there. Beautiful book. This is a great, great cover from Wally Wood to Weird Science number 13. He's probably my favorite EC artist overall. I love his covers, especially on the sci-fi books. Closely followed by Jack Davis. I'm probably more of a fan overall of Frank Frazetta, but he did very, very few covers for EC. But the ones he did were stunners. But Wally Wood did a lion's share of the cover work on their sci-fi titles, and I don't know if there's anybody better at designing Golden Age science fiction creatures and monsters than Wally Wood. Just look at that cover. Still stunning and holds up to this day. Beautiful book. This is Weird Science number 14. Another beautiful, beautiful Wally Wood cover. Weird Science 15. I'll have to double check. I'm not sure which numbering this is because I've forgotten if it's the first or the renumbering. But not sure who did that cover. Yep, that's Wally Wood again. One of his Dino covers. Here is possibly my favorite Wally Wood EC cover. This is to Weird Science number 16. And Captain Strangelove pointed this out a long time ago. This iconic Wally Wood cover, his design of the Martian here, influenced nearly everything that came after it. The Martians on The Simpsons are blatantly modeled after this cover. And of course, the ultra successful Mars Attacks line, their design was totally ripped off of this too. But just a gorgeous, gorgeous piece of cover art from the great Wally Wood there. This one's a little more beat up. Weird Science number 17. Again, Wally Wood greatness. Beautiful design, beautiful women, great alien. And this is Weird Science number 19. I believe that's Wood again. Zombie outside the airlock. We have Weird Science number 18. One of the many Ray Bradbury adaptations. Another great Wally Wood cover there. Another Wally stunner here to Weird Science number 20, a cover that probably wouldn't be considered too PC today, but they really pushed the boundaries back in the golden age, and EC was a big part of why the Senate hearing on comics affecting juveniles happened. They were a big target of that. But as you can see, alone in space with 50 frozen dolls just waiting to be thawed. Now let me see, eeny, meeny, miny. A bit sexist, but it was a different time then. And again, another adaptation of Ray Bradbury's work in this. This is a great, great Wally cover. Clearly influenced by the old pulp magazines. Weird Science number 21. Another great monster design. Here we have yet another Wally cover that is gorgeous and beautifully laid out. Weird Science number 22. I can't imagine how hard it would be for kids to walk past these covers in the 50s and not have to pick them up. That's what Jim Steranko always said. Back in the golden, silver, and bronze age, a great cover spoke to the customer when you walk by and said, hey, you have to take me home with you. And I can't see how people could walk past these books at that time, especially with what was around them, especially artistic-wise. But here's a beautiful Al Feldstein cover to Weird Fantasy number 7. And as I was saying, look at the logos. Very, very similar. You can see why it was a bit confusing back then when people didn't really have any reference for buying comics on hand back then. Didn't have smartphones, didn't have the internet, didn't even have price guides or an index. So they had to rely pretty much on the shopkeeper. Half the time they were, pharmacies and newsstands, and the people who worked there didn't know. So, but beautiful Feldstein cover nonetheless. This is Weird Fantasy number 9. Another Al Feldstein cover. Weird Fantasy number 11. Feldstein again. Here's a fantastic Al Feldstein cover to Weird Fantasy, number 16. See, it even confused me with the science there in the border. But just a great, great Al Feldstein cover. Bring a little bit of his humor from Mad and Panic to the sci-fi covers. Great stuff. Beautiful dinosaur cover by Al Feldstein here to Weird Science. Weird Fantasy 17. Did it again. But yeah, beautiful cover. These, I don't know, they said they didn't sell as well as the horror books, but a lot of these I come across seem much more well-read than a lot of my horror and Two-Fisted Tales and other books. But here's Weird Fantasy number 18. Pretty rough shape, but happy to have it nonetheless. This is Weird Fantasy number 19, and gorgeous Joe Orlando cover. The great dinosaur creature in the background. They should have opened it. I'll try and see if I can find a link and put it in the description, but if not, Google it. This is Weird Fantasy number 20, again with a great Al Feldstein cover. But what's interesting to me about this issue, I know I showed it maybe in my top Golden Age books, maybe. But I showed in another video, I opened and showed the centerfold. They were advertising for one of their horror books, I believe it was Vault of Horror, where they had a cover with a guy who had a hatchet buried in the middle of his forehead. Before the book came out, it had been censored, and the cover came out without the hatchet buried in the guy's face. And this centerfold ad in this issue here is the only place that you could see the original cover as it was intended before it got censored. So I think that's pretty cool. Next up, one of my favorite EC Sci-Fi covers, Weird Fantasy number 21. This is an Al Williamson cover that Frank Frazetta did an incredible job inking, and that is a stunner of a cover. Very happy to own that one. Like I said, Frazetta didn't do a lot of work on EC, and when he did, he was usually inking Williamson. Weird Fantasy number 22, another Joe Orlando cover. Now, as I had mentioned, the two titles, Weird Science and Weird Fantasy, were not only confusing in their numbering and their title logos, but they didn't sell as well as a lot of other books. So they decided to combine the two companion titles, into one title they called Weird Science Fantasy, which I guess sold a little better but didn't last long. This is a rough copy, but I'm happy to have it. This is Weird Science Fantasy number 23, and another Wally Wood cover there. Weird Science Fantasy number 25. Beautiful Al Williamson dinosaur cover. This one's in pretty decent shape, especially for a Golden Age white cover. Weird Science Fantasy number 26. Al Feldstein Flying Saucer issue. Here's another beautiful Wally Wood cover. Really love this one. Weird Science Fantasy 27. I just kind of wish they didn't take up so much room on the cover with this rocket, because that is a beautiful cover and deserves more display room, but glad to have that. Here is my copy of Weird Science Fantasy 29. This is my favorite EC sci-fi cover. One of my favorite covers of all time in general. The only cover Frank Frazetta did for EC, and it is beautiful. What's interesting about this cover is it was originally a Buck Rogers cover that did not get used for whatever stupid reason, but Frank took it and re-edited it, took the helmet off Buck, made his hair blonde, changed the laser rifle in his hand to a club, and there you have, as Russ Cochran put it, arguably the greatest cover ever published in the comic medium. And I'm so happy to have this, and it's a pretty decent copy to boot. Really love that book. Next up, Incredible Science Fiction number 31, and I guess whoever had it didn't like that it was no longer pre-code, and look how huge that Approved by the Comic Code Authority logo was when they first started using it. Great Jack Davis cover nonetheless. Yeah, look, that that Comic Code Authority stamp is 4 times the size of what it was in the 80s. Another Jack Davis stunner to Incredible Science Fiction 32. I actually got this book as a gift from my buddy Evan Leahy, so thanks once again for your kindness, Evan. And I believe this is the final issue, Incredible Science Fiction number 33, and another great Wally Wood cover he contributed. So, very happy to have the books that I do. I'd love to finish this run at some point, both of these runs, but very, very, very tough to come by some of those early books, and they're not cheap if you do. So I'll keep grinding at it slowly but surely, and who knows, maybe one day. But everyone, as always, I thank you for your time. I appreciate you stopping by. Take care of yourselves, and enjoy your comic books.